Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Command Post Cohort. I'm Craig, and I've got Andrew here with me.
Hey everybody, welcome back.
We are looking forward to discussing standards today and how that relates to leadership and how can leaders utilize standards to make everybody's life a little bit easier and, continue to build towards that high performance team, and how do we build towards trust, because we know that trust is a key element in that.
Yeah, I feel like when you say standards, like there's a lot of baggage that comes with it, right? People like scared of standards or like, oh, standards.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to it. It's really a helpful tool, like you just said, to really help the organization get.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of things inside leadership that have these negative connotations to them because maybe we had a bad experience with it one time.
Mhm.
Standards is one of those where sometimes managers, maybe they weren't acting in the best interest as a leader, but as a manager, they were worried about a metric and they were really focused on that actually hindered the team. And so
Yeah,
people, when they hear a standard, they think Craig's just going to come in here and he's going to come up with this number and I have to create so many widgets a day, or he's going to yell at me because I didn't meet my number. And
yeah,
that's really not what standards are about in my
yeah. It's a
perspective.
lot more than that.
Yeah, and I think that they're a tool for accountability. They're a tool for expectations, and they work both ways as well, because if there's a standard for performance on my team, me as the leader, I'm held accountable to those same standards. It's not do as I say and not as I do. It is these are the standards for us as an organization, and this is how we build our culture,
Yeah,
and we all have to. I think it's best when they are public and everybody knows what the standards are. I can't just create a standard and not tell anybody and expect
yeah,
them to meet that.
yeah. You're right, man. This whole thing goes to building that trust that you always talk about, right? And once, I think once we discuss kind of what the value of standards can be here today, I think you'll find, right, the standards and putting them in place correctly and for the right things build the trust that will increase in efficiency, reduce risk, and increase performance and value, right? So I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a good talk.
Yeah. I think where I'd like to kind of start this is the idea of known standards.
Yeah.
The story I used to describe this is, at one point after getting out of the Army, I worked at a fire department, and fire department has some interesting culture and traditions. And one of those in the firehouse I was at was the most junior person there, whether that be a rookie or someone who's even been there for a few years. They do the dishes after dinner. And it was interesting to me. I mean, I do the dishes at my house, you know. I mean, it's not every day, but that's something that happens in life, and doing dishes doesn't seem like a big deal. But to some individuals, that was a important piece of the traditions. There was a junior individual does the dishes after dinner. We had a recruit who was doing ride-alongs on our ambulance with us one day. I was riding on a different truck. I'd actually been more the ones cooking dinner, and I was still junior. I'd probably only been there in the department for about 2 or 3 years, so I was far from senior by any means. But one of the individuals who was senior, probably been there at the department 12, 15 years, after dinner noticed that the rookie was not washing the dishes. And he came into the kitchen kind of agitated and talking, hey, why? Look at that. Rookie's not doing dishes. I can't believe that. Look at kids these days. They have no respect. They don't do the dishes. And it became this generational trash talk about this guy doesn't do the dishes. And so I asked the question, I said, does he know he's supposed to do the dishes? And they said, well, he should. And I
Well,
said, well, did you tell him? And everybody was saying, well, no, I didn't tell. Why would I have to tell him? He should know better. He should know that he's supposed to do the dishes if he's the rookie here. And so I was really just amazed at the idea of They expected this individual to know what their
Yeah.
standard was with no form of communication, no form of training. There, when you're at the fire academy, that's not something that comes up. They're
They
talking
don't
about
cover
extinguish.
that.
No,
This is how you hold the hose. Here's how you do the dishes. That's not. They don't do that together.
no. Oddly enough, it is. We're worried about what to do with ladders and fire hose, not the dishes. And so I went over to the individual and I said, "Hey man, would you mind helping me do the dishes?" And he said, "Oh, of course." So he comes over, and me and him do the dishes. And in my station, we had about 10 or 12 people on average there. And so there was a significant, amount of work there for the cooking and cleaning for that many people. But he came over and was very helpful. And so I explained to him, I said, "Hey, just so you're aware, the tradition in the firehouses in this organization is that the junior person helps with the dishes. And other people will help. I mean, I've had senior officers and other people come in and be like, no, I'm doing the dishes tonight." But to at least initiate that. So I explained that to him. He said, "Oh, I'm sorry." He said, I didn't know. I'll make sure that, next time I jump on this first." And so afterwards, I went back and talked with the individual who was so upset and just explained. I said, "Hey, man," I said, "he didn't even know."
You didn't
I
know.
said, "You got to give him a chance." I said, you got to at least ask
Yeah.
him to do something before you're upset with them not doing it."
Yeah. Start
And it
limiting a
was
whole generation.
right. And that was very telling to me of how easy it is for people to forget that just because you know the standard or that's what you expect, did you communicate that to everybody? And that echoes back to the last episode when we talked about communication.
Mm.
But we
Mm.
have to make sure we communicate these standards, or they're not going to help us. They're not going to be effective accountability and tools to help empower our team.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, man. I remember a time not too long ago. So I mean, I was a major, so I've been in the army for like 13 years or longer at that point, closer to 15 years, 16 years. And so I was a major, pretty senior, really, from by most standards for the army. And I got to a new unit, and I was at my desk working on things, and all of a sudden, this guy that was he was my boss, really. He comes and said, "Hey, why aren't you in this meeting?" And I was like, "What meeting? What are you talking about?" He's like, "You're supposed to be in this meeting." Okay, just like Craig was just saying, I didn't know there was a meeting. I didn't know I was supposed to be in it. I didn't even know what it was about. So I didn't know the standard of me and my position being at this meeting. And he's absolutely right. Like I didn't know. And now that my boss came and told me to kind of held me accountable to it and explained to me in some choice words that I was supposed to be in this meeting. So then I knew, right, that hey, every
Right.
week I
Yeah.
gotta be in this meeting.
Yeah, but it's one of those things like if you're trying to set your team up for success, making sure they know those standards ahead of time, you
Mhm.
probably would have if you had known that the day prior.
Yeah,
I mean, I've known you long enough to know that you're going to take your notes and the data that you need for that, and you're going to be there at the appropriate time and willing to engage and collaborate. But
yeah,
if you don't know about it, like that is just one of the things to me that can be very frustrating for a team. Because I mean, you think about your example, that was early on when to a new assignment.
yeah,
That's always a challenge of like, okay, so what else have they not told me?
yeah, yeah, exactly, right. And now you're fighting from a position of disadvantage, right? Like, oh, well, I've already got a knock against me because I wasn't at this meeting. So you got that going through your brain, right? And so you don't know what your boss thinking or the rest of the culture is thinking, what everybody else is thinking about you. Like, oh, I'm brand new. Oh, this guy, he's brand new and he doesn't show up at meetings.
Yeah, I mean, it's there was that same conversation with the recruit. We're like, oh, I
Mm.
bet he's not going to be a good firefighter. Look at him not doing the dishes. It's like, man, that has nothing to do with his ability as a member of this team,
Yeah, yeah,
but it goes to show that how important those communicating those standards are.
yeah,
And and when I think of standards, the way I like to describe them, because they come in many forms. They can be a simple yes or no, what you can or can't do. and then sometimes they're more your left and right limits.
Yeah.
When and I don't know about you, but a lot of times when I was in the military, we would try to describe things and say these are your left and right limits, which kind of
Yeah.
harkens back to the to go into the range and all your targets are in between. You know, old school there was literally what looked like a barber's pole at the left and right hand side
Yeah.
of the shooting range, and all of your targets had to be in between those. And if you were sending somebody out to complete a task or to set up some event, even say, hey, I'm going to give you your left and right limits. And then that gives you the freedom to maneuver inside of that
Mhm.
and the ability to make decisions, because I think our teams want to be autonomous and have choices when they can.
Yeah. Yeah. People are happier when they are empowered, right? And they get empowered when they know they feel more empowered when they're trusted to execute things to standard and have some degree of their own decision making ability,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So,
And so the way I try to think about it outside of the military lens of a firing range and left and right limits is as I like to think about it from I guess, a maritime standpoint or boating and ships
Craig was not a
is
sailor, to be clear.
no, no, yeah. So but I listen to Jimmy Buffett,
Yeah, that's
and
close.
so there's the joke about keeping it between the navigational buoys, and I think that when I think of standards for left and right limits, if you're ever out on a boat on whether it be going out to the river or even on the coast, they've got those red and green buoys out there to mark the channel so the ships know where to stay. And there's nothing saying that you can't go over to the edge really close to the buoy or stay right in the center between those buoys. But those are the standards that kind of keep you in line. And so when I'm working with my team on, hey guys, these are the standards for our organization or for this event, whatever it may be, I try to think of it like I'm setting up the safe channel in the middle of the waterway. And I'm going
Hmm.
to give them a
Hmm.
buoy to the left and right. And I'm expecting them just to stay in the middle, and they have some ability to make those choices and decisions. And as long as they're out there, I know that they're safe, so to speak,
Yeah.
or they are operating within my intent and our organization's mission, as opposed to just saying, "Hey, I need you to go from point A to point B without any parameters." That's
Yeah.
when you run aground, so to speak.
Yeah.
You, you end up on the rocks.
Yeah. So
And
so my first job was I was I bagged groceries in my hometown when I was 15 years old. Right, it was the first thing I did. So I think about in a discussion of standards, left and right limits, right, and how that might apply to say a shift leader at a grocery store, right. Well, think about all the things that are going on in a grocery store during one shift, right, or one time of day, right? You got to get the carts from the parking garage. You got to make sure bags are at each register. We can make sure there's people working the registers. You got to make sure that all the products are faced up against the shelf fronts and the place is clean. So there's all these different things that have to be accomplished, right? More than one person can accomplish, which is why we have a team, right? Why we build and hire people. So, like, if one of my standards as a shift leader is that we'll stick with the rookie, right? The rookie once an hour goes and collects all the shopping carts from the grocery store, right? So the
yeah,
first couple of times I'll say, hey, listen, you're the junior, so today your task, or once an hour, you're going to go out and clean up all the buggies from the car, take them all from and bring them in, right? So I'm going to go out there with a couple of times, say, hey, don't try and take 30 at once. That's too many. Maybe do 10 at a time. And you need to do this once an hour. Don't hit any cars. Here's a little whoopee light you can put on top so you don't get hit. So do that with him a few times. Check on him a few times, or her. And so then with that knowledge, when I say, hey, once an hour, yeah, he can do it, at the bottom of the hour, the top of the hour, 15 minutes in. whenever is just once an hour, right? I don't need to stay on top of him and say, "Hey, it's 12 o'clock. Have you gone out and gotten the buggies?"
Yeah. Yeah,
Because
and it
that's
gives
not that's just going to be frustrating, right? To have his supervisor right over the top of him continually asking the question. It's also going to make him think that I don't trust him or her, right?
yeah, and I think it gives him that ability to make the choice of in between helping customers or in between moving products. Hey, this
Yeah,
is a good time to go out there and do this. Or maybe
exactly.
it's a day when it's raining and he's trying to time it with breaks in the weather.
Yeah,
And
allow him to make that decision for himself within that hour window.
right. And look at it from the leader's perspective too. The leader has more important things to worry about than those buggies. And so after you've kind of checked on him, the first day or two you've assigned him this task and know he is capable and is withholding that standard, you can worry about other stuff. You can go back to the warehouse or the back in the supply and make sure that they're not running over stuff with the forklifts. There's other things to worry about. And one thing I always ask when people get bent out of shape about something like, well, hey, the buggies are supposed to be brought in at 12 and he did it at 12:05. So what changed between 12 and 12:05?
Yeah,
Was there anything catastrophic? I've always had kind of an issue with meetings that are either Friday at like 5:30. It's
yeah.
like, so what happens that we can't do this Monday morning? Are we going to
Mhm.
work over the weekends? What are what is the defining intent or what changes with the timeline? And I'm not saying timelines are to be ignored. Coming from the military, times are very important to us. If we say we're driving at 7:30, then we're most likely at 7:25 pulling out of the gate. And
Yeah,
so there are times where it is very specific for a reason, but sometimes it's not, and we should just let our team members decide when is best to do that and not worry about the
yeah,
minutia.
yeah. I feel like that's a whole other show we could talk about, right? Like,
Yeah,
when
probably
is it
so.
okay to change a standard, not enforce, but change when it makes sense,
Right.
right? Because like just like you were saying, there's sometimes no, you absolutely cannot change that, right? So I think about in the army we do things called patrol bases. It's where you basically go camping in the army in the woods, but it's very highly technical because like there's lots of security parameters that you take. The point is that you're hiding and defending yourself from the enemy, and you're building all these systems in place and processes to make sure that you're not snuck up on, and if you do get attacked, you can defend yourself, things like that. So it's a triangle, and at each corner is a machine gun. So the machine gun is the most important weapon system in this element, and so you have to make sure the person that's operating it, the team that's operating it, knows what the standards are, has been trained on them, and then that you've checked on them or will check on them every so often. And then once all those things are together, then you can trust that you can tell them where to establish the machine gun position, and you can go and take care of the many, many, many other things that the leader has to do to establish this safe and secure patrol base. To get back to why, like sometimes there are just things you can't absolutely cannot change. On that corner where the machine gun is, you have to set it up in such a way that you have to put it to what's called metal on metal, right? That means in the event that if there's enemy rushing towards one side of that triangle, that machine gun, all the machine gunner has to do is move the machine gun all the way until there's metal on metal and hold down the trigger so that no wave of enemy can get anywhere near the line. Now, that's very important that he just sets that just right, or that she sets that just right, because too far to the right and you're machine gunning your own team. Too
Yep.
far to the left and you're not very helpful at all.
Yep.
So the machine gunner has to make sure it's a very specific place. You cannot change that, and that is a standard, right? So then you have to communicate this to your team. You have to train them on and say, okay, this is how you set up a machine gun. This is how you put it on the tripod. This is how you set up metal on metal. This is why it's important, because you are the last line of defense. and then you have to go back and check on them, make sure. And then after a few times, hey, machine gunner, go set up over there, and they know, right? So that allows you to go on. You trust them to go and do that, and they then believe in themselves, right? That they can do that, and they're willing to do that, so you can take care of other things that you need to.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point about training the standards.
Mm.
Just because we go and say, "Hey, Craig, this is the standard," that doesn't mean he's capable. So a lot of
Yeah.
times we have to, as leaders, invest a lot of time and energy into training the standards. And just like what you described, setting up a patrol base, I can't tell you how many thousands of times I have trained setting up a patrol base. And it is for all of those little details. It is for all of the minutia to become muscle memory, essentially, to
Mm.
where we've done it so many times and we have critiqued ourselves so many times that now when someone says, "Hey, Craig, go set up a patrol base here with your platoon," everybody in the organization knows to what standard that patrol base will be established and that
Mm-hmm.
all those little things will be accomplished. But the first time I set one up, it was pretty trashy.
Who knows there
It
for
was probably so.
that?
It was not great. But it goes back to repetitions. And the more you train and the more repetitions you get, the more likely you are to be successful at those and for that to be more second nature to you. And it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean you still don't think through processes and analyze things, but you can do it quicker because you've got those repetitions under your belt. And you mentioned the idea of leaders changing standards versus you can't ignore
Mm.
them. And I think that's a key thing to point out is leaders have the right to assess a standard and say, you know what, we're going to change this. But leaders don't have the right to ignore it and not enforce it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I use the example of, because it's so simple, picking up trash in the parking lot. I can come in on a Monday and say, hey, the new standard is nobody walks past a piece of trash in the parking lot. You pick it up and you take it and throw it away. Seems kind of
Yeah.
silly, but, it keeps the area nicer. We've got customers coming in or whatever. However, I can't, as a leader, be walking through the parking lot no matter how busy I am, no matter what's going on, and walk past trash and not pick it up and throw it away.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
And so now I may decide after 3 weeks of doing nothing but garbage pickup that it would be cheaper to hire somebody for this. Or maybe the problem is that the company across the street leaves their dumpster open and the trash all blows into our parking lot. So we change the standard. Instead of picking up trash, we make sure our neighbor's dumpster's closed. There's
Yeah.
other ways to go about it, but the reality is once you've set a standard, you can't ignore it.
Yeah.
You have to use that as an accountability tool or you lose that trust. Because what does it do to trust if you watch your boss walking by doing the exact opposite of what he told you to do? It doesn't help
Yeah.
get that very far.
Yeah. It doesn't build the trust, right? Because that way, they know that you are doing the same thing you're asking them to do, and that
Right.
you're all working towards the same thing, which is really empowering. You know, and if I can trust that machine gunner to go set up the machine gun properly, then they can trust that I'm doing the thousand other things that I need to do to make sure that everybody is safe, right? We've planned artillery fires, we've set up claymores, and all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things, right? So if everybody does their little part, right, then we're all trusting that we're doing the same thing, working towards the same goal, then the organization is going to work a lot better. And just like Greg was saying, you can't just walk past a piece of trash.
Yeah. And it's funny that, something that simple has major implications because trust is something that takes time to develop. It doesn't, you can't just show up to your team on day one and say, hey, trust me, everybody. And then everybody
Yeah.
just trusts you. Like it doesn't work like that. It's not this.
Who are you? What is this?
Yeah. Like we don't even know who you are yet. But then, so what are these little small steps that we take to get there? But for
Mhm.
every action that we take, it's either It's either gaining trust or losing trust. And so we have to be very mindful of those little things, because it's real easy as a leader to be on the phone with maybe a key vendor. You're late for a meeting with a key client, and you stopping to pick up this piece of trash is going to delay you even further. Doesn't matter. Sorry, you shouldn't have made the standard if it's that big of a deal.
Yeah.
You can't ignore those things because people are going to notice. People are going to see that, and that causes friction and erodes that trust over time.
Yeah. You're absolutely right, man. To like the cost of not having standards, right? Number one, that you can't ever get to trust, right?
Yeah.
But then also, um, when I was stationed in Germany, we were at a range. It was a range week. We're practicing gunnery, so we're shooting machine guns off of our vehicles on a range. Well, in order to shoot live ammunition, real ammunition, you have to start out with uh, blank ammunition. Well, to shoot blank ammunition, you have to put this special adapter on the end of your barrel. So that there's risk in that, because if you forget to take the adapter off the end of the barrel, then you put a live round into your machine gun, it's going to blow your weapon apart and could injure a lot of people. So it's very important that that's done, right? You got to remember, like the soldiers executing this kind of the soldiers that are standing behind these machine guns with live rounds are very junior, right? I mean, they're kids out of high school. That's not to insult their intelligence. I'm saying they haven't been trained on the standards, right? Uh, this is part of that. But so to get to why it's so important. But when I was a company commander, this was going on, right? We were at a range week. I had one of my senior NCOs. He was an E7, so that's somebody that was like directly subordinate to me. He was over about 30 people and in charge of 4 trucks that were doing this machine gun bit, right? So he's been in a while and had some experience, and I could trust him. After working with him for so long, that if I asked him to do something, he would execute. So I appointed him. I said, hey, so there's known standards, right? I need you to go and check every vehicle before they start shooting live rounds to make sure that the adapter is off the end of the barrel. I said, yes, sir. So I trusted him to do that. And before every live iteration started, I would call him on the phone or on the radio, say, hey, are we all clear on adapters? So Roger checked them all. Every time to begin with, I checked. I said, hey, are all adapters off? Yes, yes, yes. And so then it would get to the point where he would call me and tell me, all clear, all adapters off. And we had no issues.
Yeah.
No adapter
Yeah.
got blown off. Nobody got hurt.
Yeah.
The very next company that came on the range didn't do that, and they blew off an adapter.
Yeah.
Luckily, no one was hurt. But
Right.
the point is, again, the standard, right?
Yeah, and it goes back to, there's a lot you can pull out of that one example there. Not only was there a standard, there was clear communication. There was always that confirmation that standard had been accomplished. Whether it would be you calling him or him, radioing up to you, which is a key piece early on. That if y'all were to continue those ranges for, because sometimes you're out the ranges for weeks or a month even,
Yeah.
and if y'all were doing that multiple iterations, probably by the end of that time you would have trusted him enough to like not have to get that verbal report, but early on having that communication so that that there's, because you're reducing risk. And that's what that standard's doing, is mitigating all the potential catastrophic failures.
Yeah, exactly.
And
It kept me from having to go and check every single weapon every single
yeah,
time, right?
yeah, you can be confident in the safety of your team because you have, you know, delegated that to someone else. They understand what the clear standard is, and they're able to,
Yeah,
achieve that.
yeah. And this is standards. The standards are the same in the daylight at 7 degrees in the sunshine as they were in the middle of the night in the snow in Germany. The standard was the same. This NCO did this for me in both of those situations. Like it was
Yeah,
2 o'clock in the morning, snow pouring down, and he would still call me, adapters off. So
yeah,
I expected him to do the same, maintain the standard. Doesn't matter what the conditions are.
right.
Standard is the same.
Yeah, the standards are not dictated by the environment.
Yeah.
And so, you have entrusted him to make sure that that safety process has taken place. And no matter, like you said, I mean, it can be 12 degrees and sleeting and snowing. And unfortunately, somebody has got to look at every one of those
Yeah.
vehicles.
Yeah.
And, you can't do that from warm inside the sleeping bag. Somebody's got to
Yeah.
get out
Doesn't
there and
work.
look at it.
Doesn't work.
And I think that's, we go back to the training aspect of standards. We've got to make sure that we train standards in all conditions and all environments so that we're prepared
Mhm.
for that. There's and I know with a lot of businesses, we can control the weather by being indoors. But there's a lot, I think of the construction industry. I got a lot of people I know in that, you know, you can't always just shut down the job site when it's a little cold outside. Like you've got to have your jacket and ready to go out there and go to work in the cold.
Yeah.
So when you're training those standards, you have to take into consideration, okay, what is this going to look like when it's snow on the ground, when it's raining?
Yeah.
You may actually have to add some steps in there to be sure that you can accomplish what you need to. But we have to take that into consideration and
Yeah.
not just say, oh well, we'll skip that day. It's cold outside.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Gosh, there's so many levels to everything, right? Because even like with that machine gun range story and the blank adapters, like think about that private, that machine gunner that's actually the one pulling the trigger every time at the targets. Well, now he's got this NCO coming and checking his barrel all the time. Yes, so that might be a little frustrating, but it can also be empowering in a couple different ways. Number one, it gives that gunner probably a little bit of sense of relief knowing that such a big risk is taken off their shoulders, right? But then they're also learning the standard that this senior NCO is going to come and check and make sure that I'm doing this correctly. And then it can give them a sense of empowerment when he comes up and checks. Hey, I've already done it. I know what's going to happen. So look, I've already taken the barrel. I've already taken it off. We're good to go. And so then he starts developing credibility with that senior NCO and things like that. So that we can dissect that a little bit more because then it comes to priorities, right? For that
Mm-hmm.
machine gunner, the one pulling the trigger, what do I really want that person to accomplish? Do I want them to learn to take the barrel adapter off? Well, yeah, but I want them to learn how to shoot the machine gun properly and hit targets with it.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing for him or her on that range, right? So removing this one little bit that's risky and consequential, right? If not done
Mm-hmm.
properly, and
Absolutely.
giving it to somebody with a little more authority, with a little more experience, just makes it easier to get to the point, the priority uh, for that machine gunner. But he's learning
Yeah.
new, he or she's learning a new standard, and they have all their own standards for machine gun stuff. So,
Yeah, and I think that talking priorities, I mean that shows that young soldier that their leadership takes safety seriously because
mhm.
they have placed to lead. We talked about the last episode on being there as a form of communication, and that
Yeah,
in that example right there, your NCO is showing by their presence how important this is to ensure nobody gets hurt needlessly. Because in the
yeah,
military we do a lot of risky training. It's inherently dangerous to do stuff like jump out of airplanes,
yeah,
but we have to do it to be trained and prepared for combat effectiveness sake. But little things where you can, and this goes back to you've got to know when you can and can't take these measures. But in the training environment, you were able to place a leader in a location of a potential friction point, a potential mistake happening, and now those other soldiers are learning my leaders are actually concerned about not only are we training to these standards, but we're also going to do it in a safe manner.
yeah. Because if you don't check on that standard, if you don't check on that barrel adapter, if you don't pick up that piece of trash, oh well, they don't care. So I'm
Yeah,
not going to do it. Why should I
exactly. And
care?
it goes back to, are we building trust or are we eroding trust? And I think in
Yeah,
that situation, that is building trust in that team.
it's a great point, man. I didn't think about that.
All right. Well, I think that's a a good dose of standards for for this episode. Like you said,
Yeah,
there's a lot of things to unpack here, and we'll probably
yeah.
revisit this at another point. But hopefully, y'all gained something out of this today, and we look forward to continue to share these leadership tips from our journey.
All right, thanks everybody.
Have a good one.